The Enneagram is sweeping our culture by storm, but where did it come from? Is the origins of the Enneagram even important? Join us today as we talk about the origin and the context of the Enneagram.
Well, come on, you need a drink, partner.
Expecting trouble? I'm always expecting trouble.
What do you think you're cooking around here?
Stop it now, I mean it. You're ignorant. You're acting like a child.
Well, welcome back to the Happy Holy Hour. I'm Travis, and I'm here with my co-hosts Jared and Tyler.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about the Enneagram. I don't know about you guys, but a few years ago, I didn't even know what the Enneagram is. Like, I had never heard of it. And all of a sudden, I feel like it's everywhere. It's on my newsfeed. My friends are talking about it. Churches are talking about it. Non-Christians, Christians alike are talking about it. And it feels like the Christian circles are actually like more into this than the non-Christian. I don't know if that's just because I have more Christian friends on my Facebook and Instagram. So I don't know if that's completely accurate, but that's just how it seems. What about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually had a different experience. I haven't heard of the Enneagram until maybe a year ago. And then I saw people be like, I'm a number this. What's your number? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is the test free? That's what I'm concerned about. But it's actually funny because now, even though there's a lot of hype about it, I rarely see it on my social media feeds. I actually only see it when people are talking about the concerns about the Enneagram. So funny enough, I actually see that side of it more than I see like people promoting the Enneagram. But yeah, it's only come up a few times in the past year or so.
I can't honestly say I've ever seen anything about Enneagrams on my social media networking.
Huh. So we have like three. That's kind of cool. Well, actually, like I feel like it's died down a little bit, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody say anything negative about the Enneagram on their social media feeds, like in a connection. So it's interesting that you're seeing less, but it's all people talking about how negative it is. I'm seeing more, but nobody's saying how negative it is. And then you haven't really interacted with them much at all. So that's pretty cool because that gives us a bunch of different, we're coming at from different perspectives here. I do want to say in a lot of ways I was hesitant to even make this episode happen and to deal with this topic because I know for me at least, and I'm sure for you guys too, at least for Tyler, we know a lot of godly and God-fearing individuals who love the Lord that use, promote, and even sometimes swear by the Enneagram. And we do truly believe that these people use the Enneagram with good intentions. And so we don't want to bash anybody or talk negatively about these individuals or any way or look down on people who have used it. And I have seen people they sometimes get pretty defensive about their use of the Enneagram. So it was like, do I want to stir this pot or open this can of worms? But after doing some research, we felt like our findings were too important not to talk about and share. So we're just wanting to lovingly share and be honest with our listeners. We're going to be truthful about what we found. We're going to try to be sensitive and loving but transparent as well. And this is always our goal.
And if I can add to this episode and the next episode, because this is actually going to be 2 episodes.
Yeah.
We're not here to tell you what to do. All we're doing is, we have had some conversations about the Enneagram and about some concerns. And simply, we wanted to use our platform to bring, why Christians should be cautious when approaching the Enneagram. Again, we're not creating law where there is no law, but we're here to bring these concerns to light and, help you make an educated decision on whether or not you really want to participate in it.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about in a couple past episodes. As Christians, we should be informed and be wise and discerning. And personally, I feel like after doing my research, I feel like a lot of people haven't been informed. And sometimes there's an intentional maybe deception on some of the people who are pushing this. And so I don't necessarily blame the people who've partaken in using the Enneagram in any way. I do hold, and we'll get into this, some of these other people accountable and think they are responsible for this. But again, we're trying to be loving and kind. We're not trying to be down on anybody. At the same time, we have found some pretty interesting things. In some ways, I find alarming things, and so we think it's worth sharing with people. So at least they can have an educated and more balanced perspective. And again, they should go and do their own research as well. Don't take our word for it. In while preparing for this episode, I did try to go to direct sources as much as I could. After doing my own research, I actually found a really helpful book by Marcia Montenegro, I think her name is, and she was in the New Age movement back in the day, and then she got saved, and now she talks about the dangers of it. And she's done a ton of research with some other co-authors, tracing all these things. And so I would encourage anybody to read that book. It's called Richard Rohr and the Enneagram, and we'll get into the significance of that name later on. And
if I could add to, as we were preparing for this episode, Jared and I did intentionally very little research.
Yeah.
Because quite honestly, the fact that there was a debate around Enneagrams was little known to me. And Jared, I'm not sure if you even knew that there really was a debate. So I intentionally wanted to come to this episode a little bit ignorant, because I wanted to make this kind of a more rounded conversation.
Yeah.
And try to play devil's advocate when I can. So we're gonna get into discussion today, and let's get into it, guys.
Well,
so
actually, before we get into it, I
Sure.
just want to kind of put a little bit of a lighter note here. I heard a joke this week, and I've been dying to tell you guys. So here it
for it.
goes. Dad joke of the day. Why do the French only eat one egg for breakfast?
why?
Because one egg is un œuf.
Oh my goodness.
For those listening, un and ouf is one and egg in French.
I'm glad you explained it. I felt that was needed.
Yes.
Oh, geez. So I heard number threes only have one egg for breakfast. So
Yeah, what's your number?
7, thank you.
Is it that is funny though, because I had the same experience where people are like, "What are your number?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?
I don't identify as a number.
Don't label me."
Anyway,
we'll get into that. But
yes.
on this episode, we're actually going to primarily focus on the history and origins of the Enneagram so that we can be as well informed as listeners as well before moving into our next episode where we're talking about, okay, should Christians partake in this? Why or why not? Answering some of those questions. So without further ado, what is the Enneagram? I guess the most basic way I can describe it is it's a diagram that people use to describe different personalities that people have. There's many, it can go very deep, very shallow. Most people just view it as a personality test of sorts. A lot of authors, the creators, it has more spiritual meaning behind it and significance. And so there's also a lot of misinformation on where did the Enneagram come from. A lot of people believe that it's this very, very old ancient teaching that comes from Babylonian times, but it actually really isn't that old. It started with George Gurdjieff, who was an occultist in like 1866 to 1849, and he, as far as we can tell, he's the first person to really come up with the diagram, and there was no numbers or personality types attached to it at the time. It wasn't even called the Enneagram at the time, and he would draw it on the floor and have people kind of do a dance to it. And there was, to him, there was spiritual significance. He viewed it as a way, the diagram could basically explain everything. It was a way of depicting cosmic reality. And then a lot of his followers falsely, gave rumors that he got the Enneagram, I think it was as it was called at the time, from like the Sufi Brotherhood and all these secret, ancient beliefs. But that was later proved false. But anyway, he ascribed mystical meaning and power to this thing, but it was not the Enneagram as we know it today. But that's the first time we've encountered any sort of similarity to the Enneagram. So the whole idea that it comes from ancient mystical teachings is false. So then Gurdjieff had a pupil, P.D. Uspensky, and he was another occultist. And he wrote about Gurdjieff's teachings, and then he called it the Fourth Way, which became very influential in the New Age movement. And then Oscar Ichazo who was another occultist.
Surprising.
Yeah, who actually he just passed away this year, or he's either still alive or just passed away. I haven't written 2020, so I don't want to say he's dead and he's not dead. That would be bad.
Yeah.
But he started an occult school in Chile in the 1960s, and he added some various ideas to the Enneagram. He was the one, I believe, who called it the Enneagram, and these ideas he claimed came from two spirit beings that he interacted with. I don't have the names written down here. One was like the green something, and the other was like the megalodon or something. It sounds like the megalodon. It's not the megalodon, but it sounds like it. But anyway, he claims that he got the information that he added to the Enneagram from spirits. And at this point, still there are not personality types attached to the Enneagram. So there are some ideas and thinkings added to it, but not what we're using today.
So they basically used the shape on the floor to encounter like the cosmos. Is that
Well, so I don't know if they used the diagram itself to encounter as a form of divination, like you would meditation or something else.
Interesting. Okay.
I know they ascribed like cosmic meaning to it, that you could explain basically anything, math, the sciences, the universe, matter, all these different things came back, and it's, comes back to the numbers, how you can explain different things, music. So basically they viewed it as a way to explain everything in the universe, or look at everything in the universe.
Basically the center of the universe is what you're saying, for what they believe.
Right, yeah. At least, that was like their base, at least for Gurdjieff's teachings. So then Uchazo, he was teaching at the school, and then someone else came along, Claudio Navarro, and he was another occultist, and he was a New Age psychiatrist and spiritual seeker, and he came to this school in Chile, and he learned about the Enneagram from Oscar. And he's the one who actually added the personality types, and he claims that he got these personality types from what he said in his own. So it's somewhat his own personal observations, but mostly was from automatic writing. If you don't know what automatic writing is, basically it's when a spirit being takes over your body and writes through you or for you. So it's another form of divination, basically. So
actually, yeah. So I did know a little bit
Yes.
about automatic writing.
Yeah.
A lot of times it is through a Ouija board,
right.
where people will channel spirits and write, which is like I was always told don't encounter a Ouija board, don't mess with it. But that's very interesting.
Yeah,
So,
so-
this dude Claudio,
Yeah.
he lived like 100 years after the first encounter with like an Enneagram type
Right,
thing, correct?
right.
So that's interesting.
Right, and certainly there are different teachings out there that ascribe meaning to numbers and different types of diagrams and things, but it's false. It was propagated falsely that this Enneagram has been used for thousands of years, and the idea that you can attach cosmic meaning to numbers is not new, but the Enneagram itself and what we have today is not going back through thousands of years.
Can I just add that all of these quote unquote founding fathers of this Enneagram all sound like characters out of a J.K. Rowling book.
It's some pretty wild stuff, and we don't have time to go into everything they believed, but I mean, definitely occultic, and all their writings and that definitely influenced them, and again, at least those who added meaning to the Enneagram as we know it today said it was mostly through different forms of divination that they got this. They would call it revelation. It wasn't their own thinking. It was some spirit being gave this information to them. So this is what they personally claim. Although at the time it's interesting that every single person who developed the Enneagram propagated this lie that it went back for thousands of years. And we'll actually watch a video in just a second that shows him saying, yeah, we lied to them because if we said it came from thousands of years ago and it was all these ancient teachings, it's more believable. Right. So actually, let me bring that up right now.
Yes.
Had a meaning of preliminary to the
You were referring to Oscar Ichazo.
Oscar Ichazo, who I learned it from. He, at the time, he used to say he had learned it from a very ancient source, from a Sumerian, Babylonians.
We know that to
source.
not be true.
And lately he's been claiming that he got it directly from a higher source and not from a historical source, from inspiration, from revelation, that is his word.
That's probably closer to the truth.
Yes, I trust it. But
I get a lot of stuff from. I'm serious. I get a lot of my information from higher authorities,
Yes.
and so do you.
yes.
And we know that, and we trust this.
Yes, and just like Oscar did not make a difference between what was his finding from inside of when he got from higher authority and what he got from word-to-mouth teachings,
Right.
which was negligible. Just as he didn't make a distinction, I adopted the same style. So when people heard me, they thought I was talking about something that comes from Babylonian origins through Oscar Ichazo to me.
Well, yeah, because they trust that more. They're being
Yeah.
scholars. They
I thought
trust the
it
scholarship
makes sense.
route. Yeah.
Actually, when I was I chose to do that intentionally, and I was remembering a recommendation of Oscar Wilde, who said, "If you want an idea of yours to become famous, attribute it to a famous person."
That's right.
So I was more
Or
interested
become famous.
So at the conference, I told them I had made up this tale that all this came from millennia ago, and
Babylonian
and
sources.
that this information came from the Sufis.
Yes.
I told him that actually Oscar Ichazo had not described any of the Enneatypes either. Actually, in the 7 months we spent with him, he devoted about 6 hours to talk about the Enneagram, but he never came to describe any one of the types.
That was
All
in
that came
in
from
Arica, Chile.
In Arica, Chile, yeah.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
came from my own observations, but mostly from automatic writing. It came
Automatic writing?
yeah, it came to me through automatic writing.
What did?
The specific information
And it's any types.
about Enneatypes, which I
Yes.
then verified through observation, because I was
this-
surrounded by people
Right.
I was teaching and exploring with.
And I had friends in Arica who told me essentially the same story.
Yeah.
That
John
there
Lilly.
was no mention of others besides. Who
Yes.
said there was no mention of any types except from you.
Yes.
So that you were the origin of the Enneatype concept.
And you were the origin of the word Enneatype.
Yes.
You suggested it, and I adopted that idea.
Yeah.
And I had given permission to Bob Oakes, a Jesuit with my group. I had authorized to teach a specific group of Jesuits in Chicago. And the notes from that group came to Riso, who then wrote one of the first books,
Right.
who had never received an experiential
Those were borrowed.
understanding of
Those
it.
were borrowed notes.
More than borrowed, yes.
That's what I'm being kind.
Yes, in this age of copyright, it's called something different.
Yes. No, I never accuse somebody of outright you know what.
I once questioned a Franciscan who's very well known and very respected as a Franciscan authority and theologian, and I said, "Why you keep repeating the things I say in my workshops, and don't give me credit? In the academic world, it's a habit to give credit. It's not considered moral, ethical to present the ideas as yours." He said, "We Franciscans operate differently.
Yes.
We don't give credit. We're not interested in this notion of property."
Right. And he
So-
owns that idea.
Oh, it's
He
something like
owns- Very good. Well, it's true that they have created that kind of movement. Like Max Weber used to say, all spiritual movements have a charismatic stage and then a bureaucratic stage.
Another way of saying that is
It's gone into the culture of accreditation and
Yeah.
like our educational institutions that are not there for teaching people but for selling tickets to get work opportunities that will get them more money.
Did you have
It's said that every crusade eventually becomes somebody's racket.
That's very good. Yeah, very good statement. Yeah. Well, the movement arose because, in the first place, I spoke in such a way as I had nothing to do with it. I wanted the content to get across, but not authorship. So,
Yeah.
and it's my style when I write too. In a way, I have a style of saying things as if it's not me that has come across this or that thought, but everybody knows as everybody knows, this and this happens to be the case. So people have done that only because for 30, 40 years I have not claimed authorship. This happened to arise, and I don't even know whether it may have served a purpose, that the excitement of all this popularization may eventually prove that it was good for something.
Except that it is
I'm
actually-
not particularly involved. Actually.
That was Claudio Navarro, and that was him talking about the origins of the Enneagram. But he also talked about a couple other key points that we'll touch on in just a second. So first, just the first couple minutes there, again, you can hear him saying that everything they got basically for the Enneagram, he got pretty much from automatic writing, divination, and then they both lied about the origins of the Enneagram to make it more believable. And then, later on, he, admitted, he said, okay, like I had authorship of this, but they wanted to propagate their ideas, and so to make it more believable. But that kind of leads us into the next part, because there were some really interesting points he made later in the video about how did it get from this very occultic mystic schools in South America, how did it get to the United States and from there into really mainstream evangelicalism? Because that's what really puzzled me. So how did it get from where it was then to where it is today? So he went from Claudio. He went from this school. He went over to the United States and it went to kind of this hub of New Age teaching and like a compound where they were sharing ideas. It was very New Agey, very edgy. And from there, he talked about how he gave permission for a Jesuit priest to teach some of his things. That Jesuit priest, met him at this place, El Salon, I think it's called. And so it really went from that place out from there to the United States. And I cut that part out where he says, he told people not to share it abroad, but people just have a tendency to share it anyway. And so it was his intentions for it to be more of a secluded secret knowledge where he had control over who would share it, but it really exploded. And he says one of the reasons there was so much confusion is because he never really claimed authorship until later on down the road. And he didn't claim authorship because he wanted to propagate his teachings and for it to spread faster. And it seems like he's a little conflicted about that now because, and again, this clip was cut out where he's saying that people weren't, people pulled his chance of being basically accredited or whatever for his own teachings. And he's like, wait, I'm the one who created it. As the creator, I should be giving you the authorship. So anyway, it seems like he's a little conflicted there, but he's explaining really, because he didn't directly put authorship on the teachings of Enneagram, it's been so loose and able to spread quickly. And it spread from that New Age hub in California in the 60s, 70s, where there was a lot of New Age. There was like some Jesuit priest mysticism. And so it spread into those two main groups where it kind of stayed for a while. And it became really big in the New Age. And then Richard Rohr, which is a key name that's going to come up over and over again. He's a Catholic priest who wrote a book on the Enneagram in the early 90s. And his teaching and influence had a large impact on the 21st century emergent church and progressive Christian movement. And he still does today. They're very closely tied together. But that kind of leads us into where we are exactly today. But Richard Rohr, in that video, remember the part where he was talking about, he confronted this Franciscan monk, this priest, like who's very popular and a well-known theologian. He doesn't come out and say his name, but the only person who makes sense who he's talking about is Richard Rohr. And so really, basically, the teachings of Richard Rohr are so close to his own teachings that he's accusing Richard Rohr of copywriting and plagiarizing his stuff. And basically just brushed him off, said, well, we're not really worried about that. So if you think it's really changed a lot, it really hasn't. From what he was teaching there in South America and his own teachings, well, he was trying to keep it kind of on the private level, and to what it is now, it really hasn't changed that much. But anyway, going back to Richard Rohr, yeah, so he influenced the 21st century emergent progressive Christian movement. And so from there, it spread to their conferences and in their churches. And so now you have it in the New Age, you have it in the more mystic Roman Catholic circles and their retreats and stuff. And now you have it in the progressive emergent churches and their conferences and stuff. But right now, it's still not into the evangelical, mainstream evangelical, more conservative sectors. Now, two students and followers of Richard Rohr went on to write a popular book on the Enneagram. It was published by a Christian publisher, InterVarsity Press. It was called The Road Back to You, which is something, if most people are into the Enneagram, they probably read this book. It's very popular. That was in 2016. And then the next year, Christopher Hertz, he wrote a book which was published by Zondervan, another Christian publisher, titled The Sacred Enneagram. So I think it is at that point, from those two books, that it really started. It went from the more progressive, postmodern Christian circles and the New Age and the mystics and all that. And those two books was a segue for it to go into the conservative Christian movement. And from there, just within the past, 4 years, there's like over 20 titles from Christian publishers on the Enneagram. And now there's training courses like the Enneagram Institute, or even a so-called Christian one, Your Enneagram Coach. There's podcasts and other platforms promoting it. So those two books were really the first ones to be published that were accepted in the conservative Christian evangelical field, and within 4 years it's just saturated. But I think the key there was really those Christian publishers publishing those titles, because I think that gave credibility, because people like, oh, it's a Christian publisher, so therefore it must be okay. It
must be trusted.
Yeah, it must be trustworthy. So I think that is kind of how it really quickly went from New Age, outlying mystical, and emergent progressive Christianity. Within 4 years, it's mainstream evangelicalism, which is crazy to think about how fast it moved. So I was trying to figure out, like, how did this happen so quickly? And I have like a few ideas. This is just my own thinking, so I can't really prove this. And this is not true for every person, every evangelical who has used the Enneagram. So I don't want it to sound that way, because they would be like, well, that's not describing me. But I think in general, these are some ideas or factors that might have helped it spread. So number one is there was an increasing acceptance and blurring between the lines of the progressive emergent church and mainstream evangelicalism that used to be like the very stark sectors, and now it's harder and harder to really find the dividing line in between them. And so that was one. Number two was an increasing experiential-based evangelicalism without a solid doctrinal basis. The Enneagram is very experiential in general, and so it fit naturally into what we were already looking for. It wasn't so much scholarly academic. And then number three, which is actually, I think, one of the biggest ones, is evangelicalism really got caught up also in the self-help, self-awareness, self-care craze. And I'm not saying like all self-care is bad, but the whole business and idea and thinking, I mean, we're just as much caught up with it as the secular sectors. And again, the Enneagram is all about focusing on self and self-awareness and helping self. So again, a natural fit. We were already looking for that. And then the last one was the financial incentives for Christian publishers, authors, and content creators. So you had a huge market. I mean, the evangelical market is huge. We see that politically now and in every sector. Like, it is a huge and sought after market, and then you had a huge need and a natural fit. This product, the Enneagram, is a natural fit. So you have a huge market, a huge selling item, and there's a lot of profit incentive. And I think that's what sparked it. People realized we can make a lot of money. We can meet a need that people already want in a huge market. So that's just my thoughts. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on it, and I can't necessarily prove this, but I can see some natural fits. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I have a couple of things. Number one, so I'm learning a lot of this as you have taught it to us tonight, which good job putting this together.
Thank you.
It seems like the origins of this, to me, it shocked me. You know, right now, like if you were to search for the Enneagram on social media, it seems like a really light and casual thing.
Yeah.
It really does. But when you look at the origins, it seems really dark and heavy. And definitely divination here. And I think we'll see in the next episode what the scriptures say about the dangers of this kind of behavior. But kind of a thought question as you were going through this, would it be different, or I should say, would it be more acceptable to use from like your standpoint, or like a standpoint of like Enneagrams are bad, to use it if the spiritual origins weren't involved?
Right.
So like if it was just somebody just like, hey, I'm going to put together an algorithm and a personality test, boom, would it be viewed as different? Or is the reason it's like kind of you should be cautious about it because it has these spiritual origins?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like I would say it's more permissible, but again, I don't want to be careful. Like you shall not do the Enneagram. Although I do that more personally, that's more where I lie. And there's other reasons, and we'll get into this next episode. It's not just about the Enneagram. There's a whole baggage that comes along with it. But maybe I'd say it was more permissible. You know, it's not like a bad thing. I think maybe it still wouldn't be wise. Like take out the occult, the backwards, all that out of it. It's still like not backed up by science. Kind of just like there's better ones out there in that sense. I know people are even like, no, the Enneagram is the best one out there. But you know, from that standpoint, I would say like probably. But is it like wise? Is it valid? Is it what I would ask still? Is it valid? Is it the best option? And that's something I say for a lot of personality tests in general. Like they do carry a lot of weight. Like they are defining you, and you're letting someone you don't even know define who you are.
Well, that leads me to like my next point in a way, because, you know, thinking about the cultural phenomena that this has truly become, like there are coaches out there, there's podcasts, institutes where you can learn about this. It's all based around the Enneagram. I mean, you asked the question earlier, why do you think it's spread so much? And I was thinking about this answer. What if it's just simply like that they have a broken relationship with God? I mean, that's where we all stood before being redeemed by Christ. I mean, people are, it seems like they're so desperate to get to get to know themselves even further. You know, like it's not a bad thing that they want to get to know themselves, but it's quickly becoming like idolatry, or so it seems.
Yeah.
I wonder what it would be like if people understood that they were made imago Dei, you know, in the image of God, rather than trying to look like within, trying to figure out like, who am I within? What's my aura like? Or, you know, but like, what if we understood the principles of the gospel that makes humanity so complex? I mean, what if our desire to know our holy God was so intense that we took the attention off of ourselves and put it onto him? And simply, is the Enneagram, or at least what it has become today, a result of loving ourselves more than our creator?
Yeah. Well, I think there is like an aspect of it that's super seductive, where it's like it's very much a self-empowerment and a self-help and a look into yourself. And certainly like it's not just like it's supposed to bring out your weaknesses too, though I think it really shares it in like your strengths in a way that you really like, well, like, wow, that's great. And your weaknesses in a way that's palatable for us to like digest, like, yeah, you know.
Sure.
So it I don't know. There's a seductiveness to it, but I think it's also a big indicator that we no longer see God's word as sufficient and the means of grace that he's given us as what we really need. And we'll get into this next episode because it's always like a gospel plus, even when the Christians are pushing it.
Something that I'm thinking about here, because like I'm gonna be honest. I'm totally non-biased about this. Like, I don't
Right.
really know a whole lot about it.
Right.
I mean, I took the test and whatnot, but I think the bigger issue here is that people are not seeing, like Tyler said, themselves in the image of God, Imago Dei,
Right.
where God created us in His Selim, His image. Literally, like the Hebrew word for image is Selim, but it translates more loosely to as an idol. God made us into an idol of Him. I'm gonna be careful with that, but
Right.
But I think with the Enneagram, it seems like people are trying to find their identity in these numbers, and rather
Instead of
than
our identity
seeing
in
their
Christ.
identity in Christ,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And that leads to my last point too, was, in our culture, we love dividing into categories. Think about it. You see this with sexual orientations and preferences, with gender identity, even dietary habits. You name it, there's a label for it. So I wonder too if like this Enneagram phenomena is like another way to put an identity label on yourself. Whether that's healthy or not, that's another episode. But like, I wonder if it's just another effort to do that, to put that label on yourself.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I don't know how
It gives us a way to form our identity, like,
Sure.
and to make it feel like we're customizing our own identity, even though, like, really it's someone else labeling you. It makes you feel like you're able to label yourself. It's ironic. We hate being labeled, and yet we
We try to
love
label
labeling
ourselves.
ourselves and finding our
Labels.
identity and create. It makes it feel like you're creating your own identity, but you're finding your identity, I guess, or realization, self-realizing,
Well,
your true identity. But
think about it, like having an identity that, like, going to the Bible, all of creation is God's identity. Like, God, you can see God through the plants and the sky and us mostly, because we are made in His image. But for us to make an image of ourselves is to say, I'm God. And that was like the first thing that Adam and Eve wanted to do was be like God.
Yeah, to
So-
be their own gods.
Yeah, exactly.
To
So-
determine their own destiny and ultimately really determine their own identity.
Right. And I'm not saying that you take this Enneagram test and bam, you're saying, I want to be God.
Right.
Like, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I am saying you have to be careful.
yeah. Yeah, and we will save most of that. What should we do? Like, how should we interact with this to next episode? Hopefully this episode's been helpful for people to get a greater sense of where this Enneagram income comes from, because either way, whether you've never interacted with it before, you're like, what the heck is this? Or you have interacted with it. Most likely, if you have interacted with it, you've been told a lie about where it's come from. Because I went to find the road back to you and all these different sources. I went to all the major Enneagram institutes, and all of them either completely lied or kind of whitewashed it, or said, well, yeah, this is wrong, but they didn't go completely. So they all
Or
of
that's
them,
not how we use it. Yeah.
well, they wouldn't even go with that. They'd be like, well, it might not have like completely, it may not be completely ancient, but it
Sure.
pulls from these ancient things, and so they, I don't know, there wasn't a lot of transparent truth. It was really shaded in deception, I felt like, and these people know it. Like, it's public knowledge that this is false. The guy even says that publicly, and yet these people who make their whole livelihoods and businesses out of it still
Right.
say, oh,
They're
it's
not
an
gonna-
ancient, like, you read the books, they're like, it's an ancient, and you're
Yeah.
like, wait, he just said that was a lie, and they know it. So
And yet, even in that clip that you shared, like, they constantly were reaffirming, like, this is truth. We know that that is truth.
right.
Like, even though they may not necessarily.
It is ironic. And we'll get into this next time. It's ironic because they claim, the Enneagram is truth, and then they'll turn around and say, well, yeah, at best it's this, or they'll, turn around and lie to your face, and you're like, wait, hold on, like,
What?
so
All the reason to know absolute truth. All the reason to know your Bible, all the reason to know the one true God. And Travis, thank you for walking us through this. This is really going to set us up for our next episode, which will release next week. So you don't want to miss it. So tap subscribe so that it automatically gets delivered to you. We're going to talk about, we're going to try to answer the question, should Christians use the Enneagram? Now, again, we're not trying to create law where there is no law, but essentially we're going to put a case in front of you. Christian, if you do decide to engage with the Enneagram, there's a lot of reasons to be cautious about it and a lot of concern around that. So tune in next week. You don't want to miss this episode. Make sure you subscribe. Visit us on our website at thehappyholyhour.org. Visit us on Facebook. Visit us on Instagram, and we'll be happy to connect with you then. But until then, we'll see you next week on the Happy Holy Hour.
What's your number?
2 in 1.